You're very, in all our discussions, very, very, very critical of President Zelensky. Is there anything you respect or like in him at
No,
all?
no.
At all? Not his courage through this invasion early on.
Courage. Look, let's not even go there. Find somebody else to talk to if you want to talk about anything virtuous in the man. I see none. Never have. And I think at some point in the future, he will be exposed to scrutiny, and it will be very, very bad. But that's a matter for Ukrainians in the future.
It's mainly him being a puppet for the West at Ukraine's expense. Is that how you see it?
Well, you have to go back to Victoria Nuland. She worked closely with Kolomoisky, the oligarch. Kolomoisky picked up Zelensky, who was a Jew from Russia, and planted him in Ukraine as the new leader, and then saw to it that he was elected. Wrote his script for him. And his script when he ran for election, if you go back and examine it, was peace with Russia. You elect me and I will talk to the Russians. I will go to Moscow. I will do what is required to end this conflict with the Russians, which is something the vast majority of Ukrainians wanted. They wanted an end to it. Now, we all know none of that happened, and he turned into a very different human being. But he turned into a human being that the globalists, everybody who's a member of the World Economic Forum, the leadership in Washington and the major capitals all wanted. Remember Boris Johnson, who shows up in April after there were discussions in Turkey, and there was a willingness to sign an agreement then and there, and suddenly it all died. Why? Because Boris Johnson came representing the interests of Washington and the major heads in Western Europe and said, stand your ground. We will support you. If you work with us, you will have the total backing of the NATO alliance. All the military power, technology, economic strength available will be behind you. You can't lose. So he did.
What about President Putin? Is there what would be your biggest critique of him? What has he done? Is it the invasion itself, despite NATO expansion, invading another country is a red line you stand against, or?
Well, absolutely. I opposed NATO expansion from the very beginning. I was on board with George Kennan, who warned against it in the 1990s. George Kennan is someone whose works I read when I was in graduate school, and I came to respect him enormously. And he was right about everything over the last 90 years of history. And unfortunately, nobody listened to him. But he warned against expansion, saying it would inevitably lead to a conflict with Russia. And Putin repeatedly, after he took over in 2000, in the last 25 years, has repeated that over and over and over again. Don't advance. Don't push it any further. He went into Georgia over South Ossetia because Georgia was meddling with with NATO. He wanted to make it clear then, don't come in here. You know, again, I go back to Cuba, go back to Mexico. What will we tolerate in those places? Nothing.
But we still wouldn't accept an invasion of a Latin American country for whatever reason, even if it happened, even though the US has invaded different countries for reasons we both disagree with. We
invaded Cuba 3 times in the 20th century. We wrote their constitution. We supervised their elections. How'd that turn out?
So do you think that the invasion of Ukraine was justified? I understand the NATO expansion playing a big role in it, but do you think invading a sovereign country rather than fighting that threat through other means? Because look, Sweden and Finland are part of NATO as well now.
He had tried. He had tried repeatedly. He came to Munich. He was represented at all the key conferences. His foreign minister, everyone tried repeatedly to say, do not try to incorporate Ukraine into NATO. You've already broken your promises to us. You've advanced the border of NATO to the edge of Poland. Now you want to go into Ukraine. We would not tolerate that in Georgia. We will not tolerate it in Ukraine. You just said something which is very telling. All the NATO defenses and fortifications that have been built in Ukraine. Why? Why are we there building anything?
You've got now the big base in Romania as well.
Why? Why are we there? In Europe. I went to the Kennedy School shortly before I retired. I was asked to come up there and talk about military transformation. This is 2003. After it was over, there were 19 Russian generals in the audience. And they grabbed me and put me in a corner and said, please talk to us, answer some questions. I said, okay. And one of the things they want to know is, what are you doing in Romania with this missile base? This missile base is a threat to us. Well, I knew that the popular line at the time was this was being built to protect Europe from Iranian missiles. Of course, nobody in Europe believed that. Nobody had asked for it. But that was the argument. Finally, I said, well, look, I don't think it's a threat to you, but here's something more. Well, they said, you brought Romania into NATO. And I said, are you telling me that the Russian army is afraid of the Romanian army? Of course, they all broke out laughing. The point is, we have pushed the Russians to the edge. This is what we used to refer to in the Cold War as brinksmanship. We've pushed and pushed and pushed. We knew when Putin went into Crimea why he went there, because he didn't want it to become a NATO naval base. And NATO was determined to make the Black Sea essentially a NATO lake dominated by us.
No, the last thing I want to ask you about is, why not end the war now for Putin? Putin has the upper hand in making a decision on when to stop the war. Why not end it now? Do you think there's people in his camp, more hardliners, that would go against him if he takes such a decision? Could that be unpopular in his home country with voters, considering the amount of destruction or death or destruction that Russia has faced? Obviously, Ukraine faced a lot more, but Russia still has thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, that's whatever number you want to believe. And the economy did take a hit.
I don't think the economy has struggled on the scale that we imagine in the West.
Definitely not. That I agree, yeah.
They're doing very well. Their shelves are full. There's nobody starving in Russia. They have all the fuel they need. I think right now in Russia, and again, I'm not there, so I'm dependent upon my sources on the ground, basically in Poland, Ukraine, and Russia itself, to give me a snapshot of what general feelings are. And